Welcome back again to the Bees and Goose podcast. Uh, I'm Buse, or Bucephalus, and over there...
I'm Beef,
Exactly.
the one, the only, the future king of all of England, or at least Florida.
Uh, so, last week we kind of went through, like, building kind of like a superhero...
A superhero world.
Superhero world, yeah, sorry.
That's dead air. You're going to be editing that out. We went through building a hamster.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Cybernetic hamster. Cybernetic hamster superhero named Harvey in honor of Al.
Unfortunately, we thought we'd get sued because of Rocket, but we still may go with it.
Or Harvey. Harvey the Wonder Hamster. Harvey the Wonder Hamster. You have some homework to do. Weird Al songs, man. From our time, too. It's not like it's anything new.
Apparently. So this week, we kind of went through a few changes over the course of the week, but I'm going to let Bees take it at this point, because he knows what we're doing more than I do.
Yeah, I do content. He does editing. So last week, let's start at the beginning. We're doing this podcast to bring a positive spin to nerddom, all the geeky things that we love, sci-fi, fantasy. That's about it. And it's huge. It's multi-genre encompassing sci-fi and fantasy, and that's about it. There's a lot there. So we've seen a lot of negative stuff on the internet. We like to be positive. So we started off by talking about things we loved. And the last 2 weeks we've been covering a world, an RPG in the D6 format that I had created a superhero D6, which he was to help me with. And he had come up with a story he wanted to tell, and then he correlated that into a world, an RPG setting for other people to use. What we're going to do this week is we're going to actually look at that RPG, the rules of the superpowers, and we're going to nerd out and have a good time talking about all the minute and stupid little changes we would make, and hopefully be interesting even to people who aren't that big into D6, which is the greatest role-playing system. It's so good it inspired D20 into existence. Yeah, so that's where we're at, and I'm gonna bring it up on my big computer screen.
I have it on my alternate screen as well.
And we had talked about what we had planned on doing this week was going into us talking about we want to go through. We're probably going to spend a couple of months on this once we get started, but go through creating a sci-fi cosmos, a world, or whatever you want to call it, a setting that you can tell sci-fi stories in. And I have some basic plot lines I'd like to do in that setting, which the most basic of which is remember the pirates that took over, the Somali pirates that took over a tanker? Tom Hanks was in the movie. It was Captain Sully. That was when he landed in an airplane. But it was based on real life. So I wanted to take that basic concept, like as a GM, as a writer, as a creator of story, you borrow from real life. Take that concept and tell a story of one guy defending an entire space freighter, bulk freighter, whatever you want to call it, against a group of pirates who have snuck on board somehow. And so I thought that'd be a good starting plot. If we did a bunch of short stories, that would make a good short story or a short novel, like a 200-page novel. But before you can do all that, you need to come up with the setting so that when your character is making comments about the world, they have meaning. So offhanded things you say can come back to haunt you, as J.R.R. Tolkien found out while he was writing The Hobbit. One of my favorite continuity issues with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, not just the trilogy and The Hobbit, is the mention of the necromancer in The Hobbit. Now, this is a major plot point This is why Gandalf has to leave the group. He's meeting up with the other wizards to deal with the necromancer. That's it. That's all we ever get on who the necromancer was and what the whole situation was in all four books. It has been retconned that the necromancer was actually Sauron, but that was something J.R.R. Tolkien came up with after The Hobbit was written, because Sauron as a character didn't exist yet. That's why world building is important. So this week we were going. I had a whole bunch of questions and ideas to start setting that up, and since we both work full time, Hughes didn't get a chance to really dig into it. I think you saw it for the first time, what, last night or the night before?
Wait,
I can't hear you if you're talking.
you can't?
I can now.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I am confused. So there might be some more editing. What was I supposed to look over?
I sent you the questions for the sci-fi stuff. We talked about it Wednesday. This the space world. You started looking at it. We were talking about it on the phone while we were both looking at it.
Yes.
You stand by for technical difficulties. La 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 la
Oh,
la la
right.
la
Yep.
la 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 la.
Sorry, I had the
So,
other thing in front of me, and yeah,
oh, we've got content.
we have
It's not a
content.
problem about having content. We have lots of geeky things to talk about with you guys. So
This
before we got into
this
that,
is water, I promise you.
even if it's not, who cares? So we have lots of geeky things to talk about with you guys. We're going to get to it. So that space thing is going to be the big project. Like as you follow along, all the things you have to work out while you're trying to put a setting together, a cosmos together for your story. So we're going to get to that in 2 weeks, not this week, but not next week, but the week after. So for this week, I was like, okay, so you're not ready to see that. Let's do a hour long one-on-one adventure. I'll GM or you can GM and the other one of us will play a character. And he's like, I'll play a character because he never gets to play a character anymore. He always GMs. Mostly because I'm usually asleep when we try and game. And what I mean by that is I'm usually asleep during the hours when our group gets together. Um, I work nights and we game during the day. So I'm a groggy, groggy man, and you don't want that in a GM. But we're filming at night, as you can see from my open window behind me. At least where we are, it's probably day somewhere on the planet. Assuming that whole sun and earth rotation thing that Copernicus came up with is actually right. Just kidding. So we're gonna we were gonna do that, but then like if he had chosen to like a Star Wars character, that'd be fine. But he made the point, and I fully agree, that since we've been talking about the superhero system, we should actually go ahead and do a superhero game if we're going to do a game. And I just wasn't prepared for the character who created it. If we had done Star Wars, I would have been like, okay, create a character. Okay, I've got all these scenarios. I can just throw them at you. No, he's like superhero. And I'm like, he's right. Why does he have to be right? But he was right.
And then I
So,
used my imagination.
what?
And then I used my imagination.
Yeah, you'll see what he came up with. I was thinking we're gonna get like some DC style, works with the cops, or some Marvel style, afraid of the cops, but works with the cops too, like Spider-Man. I wasn't expecting a full-on vigilante, which is what he created. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah. And we'll go through kind of the powers. And I posted all this on Rancor Pit, rancorpit.com. The index is, hold on. La 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 la. Rancor Pit D6 Holocron. Nope, that was the page I had up. Here it is. rancorpit.com/forums. If you want to get directly to it, it'll be linked. The link to this, to my RPG system, will be in the card or whatever we call it at the bottom there, in the link below. And yeah, so having said way too much, you'll be able to bring this up on your own computer while we're talking about it, and you can see what we're doing. Unless Buse really, really wants to get ambitious and actually pull up the part that we're talking about and put it on screen, I would have no way of knowing how to do that because I can't video edit at all. It is not one of the many, many skills I picked up in this life. So that's where we're
Still
at.
learning.
Um, what?
I said I'm still learning, so
I'll learn sometime. I'm learning how to run. It's very exciting. So that's where we're at. Uh, where do you want to start?
okay. Now that I'm remembering a bit more about what we were talking about, since I'm looking at the sheet as we speak, I mean, we can. If so, we're pretty much, going through world building on our own space world. So similar to
We've
last
decided one thing so far.
space.
Two things so far.
What was the second thing?
No time travel, at
Yeah,
least for now.
no time travel. All right. So,
Time travel's hard to do storyline wise. It's just hard to do, and to do well anyway. Um,
it's
go ahead.
time travel is fine to do if you're building your own story and you're just writing a story. But if you're talking about building a game world, time travel is difficult because if you think of all of the different, like most people have watched at least 2 to 3 different time travel movies or TV shows and stuff like that.
And some of them were great.
Yeah,
Back to the Future. Wow,
exactly.
great story.
But a lot of the stuff that's explored in those is stuff you have to come up with, and also uh, if you want time travel to actually affect things, so the whole predestination thing, if you go back in time, you always went back in time, then that means that to some degree you have to be able to see what your characters will do if they have access to this, which you can't. Or you have to artificially limit them to what they do, which a lot of GMs like their characters to have some leeway.
Hmm.
And so it just makes it easier to not do it. I have used time travel. He was in the game I used it in, a superhero game I ran. I have used time travel, but it was just one character, and I had it planned fairly early on. And
It was part of the setting. The players didn't get access to time travel as a power.
exactly.
That's another thing in the superhero game. We don't. I did not put in a time travel power. The linear nature of reality makes it far too difficult to. Boy, that sentence started out great. The linear nature of reality makes it far too difficult to allow for game rules to play, at least for a creator like me. To give your players that kind of control over your game world is dangerous. It's rough.
Mhm.
Unless you have a whole time travel story you yourself want to do, it's, yeah, let them have the kind of impact most players actually have on an RPG world. It's hard to do. It's also, there's a lot of bad time travel stories out there. I'm not a fan of Endgame's time travel story. Like, they wrote themselves into a corner and they needed a deus ex machina to get him out. And so they used time travel. That's Avengers Endgame, by the way. Um, I enjoyed the movie. I am critiquing, I am critiquing a part of the movie, not saying it was bad. It was an enjoyable movie. It wrapped up a lot of things. It started for the next stage. These actors have been playing the same role for 10 years. That's not an easy thing to do. Some of them wanted to move on. I appreciate all that. Um, but yeah, the time travel story itself seemed tacked on to me. Like this was not an option when you went into. There was no hint in Civil War or anything leading up to this that they were going to use time travel. The closest you would get was a time gem in Doctor Strange. A little bit of foreshadowing, not enough to really. Anyway,
Especially since it
continuing on.
often was used. But yeah. Uh,
Um, Go ahead.
so in world building, when it comes to creating your own space world, you'll notice that like every single there are many things in common with various different sci-fi franchises. and many things different. But when you kind of separate it all out, you can almost see like where stuff is picked and chosen, and you can use a little bit from almost every sci-fi thing to create any other sci-fi thing. Uh,
Be inspired by. You're not
Inspired,
stealing.
yes,
You're being inspired.
inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah, and in like 99% perspiration, you might get a novel finished. I might get a novel finished. Um, but that's the sci-fi world. This is superhero rules we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks. And I think I know how to start it off. I'll go over what the different powers are in general without getting too specific, and then we'll dive into the specifics and character creation. So if you already know how to do D6 character creation, you start with a human, um, straight out of the Star Wars RPG. There's 6 attributes. Um, you can put 2D to 4D in each attribute, and then you get 7 skill dice on top of that. And then what I did is I added in 3 dice of superpowers for a starting character. A more advanced character would have more, and there's 3 categories of powers. There's minor powers, and there's prestige powers. Major power cost what?
And purchasable powers. There was a fourth category.
Purchasable powers are part of minor powers.
Fair enough.
They cost the same amount. But yeah, that's a good thing to bring up. So major powers cost 1 dice, 1 full dice. Minor powers cost what in the D6 system is called a tip, or a third of a die. You can break a die into 3 pieces. If you're familiar with the system, this is going to make a lot of sense. If you're not, it's going to make less sense. But try and follow along anyway. So purchasable powers and minor powers both cost a third of a die to buy. And then a prestige power takes all 3 of your die. You had 3 die, now you have 1 prestige power. And those are major powers like immortality, mimicry, absorbing and rechanneling energy. What else? I said immortality. There's a Superman power. But as we talked about in the previous weeks, so they should sound familiar to our constant viewers and fans, I designed this for X-Men level powers. So, and we're talking like 80s and 90s X-Men during the Claremont run more than anything else. I told you, there's a lot of geekitude here. These are not, Superman level characters or even Thor level characters. They can't lift a building. They can't leap tall buildings in a single bound. They're generally not faster than a speeding bullet. And if they can do one of these things, they can generally only do one of these things. If you fly, you're generally not super strong. And it's designed to be limited that way. So a character like Angel, from the X-Men, who has wings, is a very powerful character because almost no other characters in the X-Men can fly as well as he can. He has a lot more control. Yeah, there's other ways to gain fly besides wings. We can get into the specifics there if that's something that interests you. But the version I put up on Rancor Pit was version 3. I went through 3 because we actually played this. We play tested this with pretty big group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to explain things over and over and over again. That's basically what it is. There's major powers, minor powers, which include one-time purchase powers like X-ray vision, or wall crawling. That was one of them. And then there's prestige powers, which take up all of your dice. And one of our friends, Booman, he desperately wanted a mimic power because when we were testing this, Heroes Season 1 was on the air.
We're letting people know how long ago this was.
Heroes Season 1 was on the air. So he really wanted to be able to mimic a power that will allow him to mimic other people's powers. He's like, come on, you can do it. He doesn't talk like this. Come on, Bees, you can do it, Bees. Come on, you can come up with something, Bees. Which is the way it felt. It's not how he talks, but it's like, I just created an entire system. We're barely trying to test it, and you want me to come up with something that works that was never designed to fit in the system? And boy, did I do a good job. Should we talk about mimicry or?
Yeah, sure.
All right. I
So,
was really happy with the way this came out. Prestige powers, Superman, absorb rechannel energy, which is not broken at all. Absorb rechannel energy is not in the least bit broken. It works exactly as intended. And like other prestige powers, it allows you to be monstrously powerful compared to other players under certain circumstances.
I understand.
Unlike luck. Luck is just stupid. Never ever take super luck. It's great. I love it.
But it can fail you.
It can fail you. The chances of you being the guy when you have super luck. So let me tell you how super luck works. In D6, there's a wild die, which means if you roll a 1, you subtract your highest and lowest die from your die pool. Because you're rolling when you're doing a skill check, you roll a pool of dice. Like I've got, I've got D2, you roll, or if it's 2D, you roll 2 dice. If it's 3D, you roll 3 dice. Um, et cetera, and so forth. They're all D6s, which is why it's called the D6 system. With a wild die, when you get a 6, you roll that die again. If you get another 6, you roll that die again. If you get another 6, you roll that die again, and you just keep adding it to your total.
I think my highest I ever got on one die was like 30, something like that.
Yeah. The first time we ever played back in college, J-Dog he had that robot with the electrical hand,
Mm-hmm.
and that robot he just exploded, and he ended up doing over 36 damage with one die. So with super luck, which is a prestige power, you actually get all of your dice become wild dice. Where is that? I don't see that in here.
It's the first one under prestige.
Supernatural luck, yeah. All dice rolled are wild die, and not only that, additionally, if anyone gets a 1 on any die in an opposed roll, so if Hughes was rolling against me and he had luck, and I got a 1, any one of my dice, not just my wild die, it counts as a negative wild die for me. So it's a very powerful power, but it can turn on you. You might get, you're going to get lucky, whether it's good luck or bad luck. That's one of my favorites. I can't believe you actually used that in the game.
Didn't work out so well for my character, but yes. It was an NPC, though, so it worked out well for you guys.
He was tough to beat. So, there's 2 kinds of mimicry. Remember, these are prestige powers. This is the only power you get. The first one I called proximity. Mimic proximity. And it reads, a character starts with 3D and mimic. A very easy roll allows them to mimic 1 power of a person in their radius. An easy roll allows them to mimic 2 powers, etc. They mimic powers at the skill level of the person they're mimicking. So there's no limit to the limit on how powerful the power is how powerful it is for you. So if you're if you've got a power that's like 560, you're rolling 6 dice for that power. If you get within range of the mimic, he's rolling the dice at 60, same power, which is quite powerful. They mimic, to add or drop powers, they have to re-roll their mimic ability. There's no limit to how many powers they can mimic at one time. However, when the person they're mimicking leaves their radius, they drop the powers they were mimicking. And the radius is 10 yards per dice. So 10 feet per pip, and they start with 3D and mimic, they start with 30 feet radius. That's pretty good. I'm sorry, 30 yards is the radius.
Yeah.
I caught it. I caught myself making a mistake. If you could imagine such a thing.
You want to do absorb, or should I do absorb?
Sure. So, absorb works a little bit different. Absorb is probably, well, it's actually funny. So if you want to think about heroes, absorb is kind of more like if you watched Heroes, it was more the second iteration of Peter Petrelli's mimic powers. You can actually mimic. You do have a radius, but once you absorb the power, you can actually keep the power, and you can pretty much what per. I didn't. That was what Booman had used, right? He had
Oh yeah.
the absorb mimic. Um, so they can absorb one power per D they have. So starting character, they can absorb up to three major powers, and or just like with how the minor powers work with individual pips, up to nine minor powers or combination thereof to get to the total. Uh, I can't even speak straight tonight. I'm so sorry. But again, uh, they they do grab the powers at the same level of the person of what they have it, but with the limitation of they it only goes up to the amount of power that they have in mimic. So 3D and mimic, if they steal a power, it's going to be a maximum of 3D. And I'm assuming that that also went for minor power as well, or
Yeah.
yeah. So you could be fairly powerful and have maybe be able to keep like a few different powers and be able to swap some out, but individual people, like if you steal from somebody with, like, let's say 5D strength or 5D super strength, and you are starting mimic, you're only going to have 3D super strength. So you gain that extra power, and you might have other powers to kind of fill in,
Mm.
but you aren't going to be able to. You're not going to be at the same level as that person unless your mimic skill is already matched to theirs or higher,
Yeah.
which can create some fun situations. And Booman, Booman though swapped powers like they were candy. So
Pretty much. Once you've got power, you can use your own character points to improve it,
mm,
um, which you might be throwing those character points away. The other restriction on it is you got 3D and Mimic. If you absorb somebody who's only got 2D and Super Strength, you're only getting 2D and Super Strength, even though you have 3D and Mimic. And like Bu said, if you've got, if you're trying, you got 3D and Mimic, and they've got 5D and Super Strength, you're only getting 3D and Super Strength. I tried to keep it balanced. Um, I am very happy to say that neither one of these powers got a single word rewritten. Um, they didn't come out until version 2, but not a single word was rewritten. I based Mimic Absorb off of characters not only like Peter Petrelli, but also Rogue from the X-Men.
yep.
And there's a these are standard powers inside superhero fiction. It's not like I'm just choosing one particular character, but the Mimic from the early days of the X-Men, the later part of the original team, he had a proximity mimicking power. There's other characters who have that power. Um, yeah, can't think of any off the top of my head. But absorb. What other powers do you feel like talking about?
Uh,
That's the wrong mouse.
well, immortality is fairly simple and straightforward. Immortality uh, is I used immortality for my big bad of the long-term superhero game that we played. And I think that game went on for like 2.5 years total, something like
Yeah,
that.
every other month.
Yeah. So I used immortality for that. The way the immortality power works is you can't die. And I know that that sounds fairly straightforward, but that legitimately is the power. You can't die. You you get healed within an hour if you're hurt, and if you are completely blown to bits, so there's nothing left of you, you reconstitute within a day. I think it is. Yeah, yeah. You
Yep. Take
recon.
full day to reincorporate.
So
So we had talked about this.
yeah,
Do you,
go for it.
do you want to? Okay, I'll go. So we had talked about this, and the thing we wanted to add to it was there's a purchasable power called self-sustenance or energy sustenance. And basically, if you're immortal, you don't need to eat, you don't need to breathe. Um, yeah, so you can sustain yourself without food or drink. Um, Probably get skinny, but hopefully you're not doing it that long term. You're healed from, so you don't worry about, you don't die,
Mhm.
which sounds cheap, but there's plenty of ways. The easiest way to take care of somebody like that, put them in a pair of handcuffs and hope they don't know how to pick them.
For the character I created, and well, I'll finish my sentence first. But for the character I created, he was an immortal villain, and
Mm.
there had been periods of time through the history I wrote that he had been taken out of the picture, and it was as simple as literally chaining him up and throwing him into the ocean, putting him in a box and sinking him in the middle of a lake. Eventually, stuff rots, corrodes, and he gets out. But it means you might get rid of him for 1 to 100 years by just sticking him somewhere. I personally think that as a power, it would take a very special player to use it because there it's much more of a role playing power. You don't have much in like the only combat abilities you have are the combat abilities that you start with, like for your character general skills. Uh, you're never going to be the tank of the group or anything like that.
Well, for one hit,
For one hit, you can be the tank. But I found that it works well, and even in comics, Beats and I were talking about this. Even in comics, like immortality tends to be the power that, like, a bad guy has, because it's easier. Because we like our heroes, at least a lot of us, myself, I won't speak for others. We like our heroes with weaknesses. It makes them vulnerable. It makes us able to identify with them. Something like immortality, you don't. I mean, you don't really have a weakness outside of the normal, physical human weakness and stuff like that. But there's nothing really to kind of grab onto. You've got like an immortal good guy, and yes, it can be done well. But as a character playing, it's
I want to try it.
I, go for it. I don't think it'll be as fun because a character who has immortality, you're a starting character. Therefore, you don't have the advantage of like a bad guy who you give immortality to who, oh, he's been around for 1,000 years, so he's built up all of these skills and things like that. No, with you, you are the 25-year-old guy who just found out you were immortal,
By
and
getting hit by a bus or whatever.
exactly. And now you're like, okay, I've got this power in a world full of people who are throwing cars at each other. You can survive being hit by that car.
Yeah,
I mean, if you've got a good set of, don't get me wrong, I
and
could,
it hurts.
oh yes, and it still hurts. Yeah, you don't have any sort of pain reduction or anything. It just, but I can
You get
imagine.
knocked out. You can be stunned. You can be mind controlled.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But I can, but there's definitely, like, even as a player, there's a lot of situations that a character, that power could be incredibly useful because no matter what, you're going to survive. You know,
the epitome of the best revenge is living well.
there you go.
I think I would have a lot of fun with it. It's not for everybody.
No.
It's certainly not for somebody who wants to go in and punch something into the atmosphere.
But
Speaking, go ahead.
I was going to say, uh, not to go too far into it, one of the reasons Immortality was a late ad, I think, is because of with the healing factor and regeneration powers, you could have
Yeah.
somebody who's functionally immortal, as long as they always rolled well.
That's when you're blowing a character point. I gotta stay alive.
Which I did.
Yeah. Let's see. That's the wrong mouse again. Mimicry, immortality, monster transformation. So monster transformation was basically again, I didn't. This was not in version 1. If, if you know me, it's not the kind of power I would normally put into an X-Men style role-playing game. But the design for it was to create a Hulk-like character where you're, Uni Banner, but when you transform, you're the Incredible Hulk. So you actually borrow attribute points and they become superpower points when you transform. And you can set it up like a werewolf where it's full moon is when you transform, or there's a curse or something like that. But you're transferring your attributes over to superpowers when you get it. And also allows someone to become like an energy being, like an Archon in StarCraft or something.
Or
Or
even
go ahead.
Donald Blake into Thor, if you want to go back to that.
Yeah. Or even to take it and take somebody who's a moron, no offense, but you created a strong for real or human person, and you turn them into a super genius when they transform. That's kind of putting the whole rope on its head. So that's that's a very flexible, interesting power. And I've got it in there a couple of times. You need to work with a GM. 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 The guy running the game needs to approve of your monster transform if you go that way. It's very easy to break the game. Um, but yeah, the Hulk and characters like the Hulk or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, characters like that were the inspiration for this. I think I was actually watching Eddie Murphy.
Nutty Professor.
Yeah, the Nutty Professor. Hercules, Hercules, Hercules. I love that movie. I think I had seen that recently when I was working on this. But again, it was when people were like, "Come on, it's a superhero game. I should be able to play something like the Hulk." So I made this, and nobody tried it out. So I ran some tests on my own.
I created
Yeah,
C.
yeah, it's balanced enough, but it is easy to break the game with that for you min maxers out there.
And
Um,
realistically, I mean, the same case even goes in, well, I don't know about current edition D&D and stuff like that, but like I remember version 3 and 3.5 of D&D, like even the prestige classes, like whenever you put prestige in front of something in a game, it's not normally intended for someone with more limited roleplay experience.
mm,
And B, even using them is up to your DM or GM because they are meant to be extra powerful. And yes, there's some, yes, there's pluses and minuses, and yes, you can, everything is pretty much in any game, in any RPG, stuff is written to be balanced. You're more powerful in some situations, less powerful in others, but it's written to be balanced. But that being said, the very nature of, in D&D the classes or in this the powers, it does make them game breaking, so you need to work with your GM just because it might not be something they want you to play because it can cause you to outshine. I've played in Star Wars games where force powers weren't allowed because again, as time goes on, you can become too much of a powerhouse and kind of outshine the other players, especially
it's
depending
not just
on the
that.
GM.
So we've talked about, might have been in the first episode, which is, lost to the sands of time for now.
Not yours.
Um, well, technical difficulties. It's lost to technical difficulties, which is why I'm wearing the helmet this time around. Oh, the headphones. Um, but it might have been after. Role playing comes out of D&D. D&D first edition, the red box or white box or whatever it was built for combat gaming. It wasn't built for growing characters and telling a great story, which is what RPGs are now. It's communal storytelling with a set of rules and a guide, somebody kind of guiding the story along. But how you deal with these things, one of the is how the story gets told, and you need when we say balanced, it doesn't mean that two things are perfectly equal. The only system I've seen where that worked out was D&D Fourth Edition, where all of the classes that did the same thing did exactly the same thing. So all of the healing classes or leader class or whatever they called it in D&D 4 had exactly the same abilities with different names, and that was it. They rolled a different stat, but it was the same skill test. It was the exact same powers, and D&D 4.0 failed. I'm not trying to be negative, but I am stating the truth. It absolutely failed. It's one of the shortest lived D&Ds. They went from 3.5 to 4 to 5 in a rapid succession. And it was built to work with a video game that never came out. So I don't even know if they even finished working on it, but it was designed to be interacting with a computer, so you can actually do one person games with a computer, and none of that came to fruition. And that's why D&D 4.0 failed. Like if you've ever played it, back me up on this. There's a million things to roll for. I'm exaggerating for each action you take. There's always something else to roll, and that's just annoying. You want something for an RPG. You want something that flows, that goes fast. You want your combat to be quick, but you also need it to be slow enough that you know what's going on. You can follow along, and it makes sense. So you're not just caught by surprise by what's happening. Because you never know when you're playing a video game, which does all the calculations for you. You don't know exactly what's going to happen every time you attack because there's a random dice generator and this, that, and the other thing. But it's all, the rules are all the same for everybody until you hit a glitch or a bug. Well, you are the computer. The GM, the game master, is the computer for an RPG, and he or she they have to keep all of this in their head, calculate stuff out, remember the rules. You got to keep it simple enough for one person, one average person, to be able to do that. You can get people who are supercomputers who can handle all this stuff, but they're few and far between in regular life, let alone finding somebody who's willing to GM for you who could do all that. So, yeah, the balance I was seeking with this game, that we're seeking with this game, is not perfectly equal. It's more like rock, paper, scissors, or what was the Big Bang Theory one?
Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock.
Yeah. So it's not the kind of balance where where if everything is equal, it's this can beat this, but this can't beat this. A can beat B, but B can't beat A, but B can beat C, and C can beat A. Rock, paper, scissors, basically. So somebody with psionic powers is going to have an advantage over somebody who's super strong and invulnerable. The only defense they have against psionic abilities, psychic abilities, is their willpower roll of their regular stat, which they haven't enhanced at all because they took super strong and invulnerable. Somebody who has psychic powers can't beat somebody who's super strong and invulnerable in a fist fight. They didn't improve their physical prowess. So some of these powers, they're not balanced in the sense that they're perfectly equal. They're balanced in the sense that I can do something you can't do. I can do something you can't do. And they're not based on combat modules. One of the things you don't see a ton of in D6 is combat modules. Adventures, if you will. There's actually a decent amount because, again, this is the first time anyone had ever done this. But they weren't nearly as popular. Let me bring up how many there were. They weren't nearly as popular as what Star Wars called galaxy guides or supplements, where it just gave you more information so you could write your own story. With an adventure, somebody else is writing the story for you, which makes it a lot easier to run as a game master, but it's not nearly as much fun. You want to come up with your own story. So most of the GMs I've talked to who've used the official adventures for D6 have modified them or used a part. Or like in Starfall, you start off in the prison of the Star Destroyer. I used that for a game that had an entirely different plot,
but I like that starting idea. So I use that for you didn't play that one. But that's how they started off. And it really, one of my players got, the only one who had serious RPG experience, got really annoyed at me for the first hour of that game because he built a computer science character. And he kept saying, "Can my computer science skills do anything right now?" No, there's no computer here. But my computer science skills are through the roof. I should be able to do something. You can do a lot of things with what's around you, but there's no computer. You can't be a computer science guy. You can't be a programmer without something to program on. So for the first hour, he kept saying that as they were making their way through the Star Destroyer. Well, it was an Acclamator cruiser for you Star Wars geeks out there, because it was set during Clone Wars. And finally, they get to an access, a partial access to the ship's main computer. It wasn't the mainframe. It wasn't the bridge where all the main action is. It was just a partial computer, and he tore it up. He wasn't great in combat. He was an okay pilot, but he could tear up a computer system, and he did. And suddenly, the guy who was most put out during the game up to that point was just going and loving it. So it's you see that you're going to see that a lot in the superhero RPG because that's the kind of balance we're going for. Is where you're going to have your moment to shine if you've got a game master, a storyteller, a main storyteller, whatever you want to call it, who knows your characters, he's going to give you or she is going to give you the opportunity to shine. If you've got a character who took all their stuff and put it into technical, so you can build stuff, fix stuff, and repair stuff and do computer science, they're going to give you an opportunity to use that. You don't shine during combat, and that's okay. In D&D, you had to be able to shine during combat. In most RPGs, you have to be able to shine during combat. But in D6, role-playing is far more of the game than the combat actually is. You have anything to add, or should we move on to another power, or?
I think you said quite a bit. Yeah, we can move on to another power. I think we have. Well, I guess the only thing we didn't cover under the prestige was just the Superman, but that was just pretty straightforward. You pretty much started considerably weaker in a bunch of powers.
The idea with the Superman is what?
Oh no, I was going to say you just started considerably weaker in a bunch of powers, but you increased them. But you were able to like kind of like increase them a little bit at a time. It made it so that if someone wanted to be like a Superman style character, that they could, but
You got to earn it.
yeah.
So Superman gives you 1 pip in the following passive abilities. So major powers have passive abilities and active abilities. You don't have to activate passive abilities. They're things like super strength, super dexterity. They just give you a bonus to all the skills under that attribute. To that attribute, basically. So you get, instead of a full D, which allows you to, like if you get super strength, if you take 1 dice of super strength, you end up rolling 3 dice in addition. You get a plus 3D bonus to all of your skill checks under strength. Same thing with dex. 1D equals 3D. They use 3 a lot in D6, so I just grabbed onto that. Same with super knowledge, perception. All the attributes get that. On top of that, you get invulnerability, which when you take damage, you add for every 1D, you add 3D to your defense. And for I gave you a super healing factor. Oh, and also running speed and super speed combat. But we'll get to that. So what the Superman gets is instead of a D, instead of getting a 3D bonus to all of your attributes, you get a 1D bonus to all of your attributes. Okay, you're effectively at 0D plus 1 for the following superpowers: super strength, super dex, super mechanical, super perception, super technical. I'm forgetting one. So it's only 5: strength, dex,
Invulnerability,
perception.
healing.
Perception.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you also get 0 plus 1D to invulnerability and to healing factor. So you start off pretty weak, But as you continue on the adventure, it only costs you one character point to advance any one of those. And if you use all of those, if you use one skill and get healed during your adventure one time, then at the end of the adventure, you can increase all of those to 0D plus 2. At the end of the second adventure, you can increase all of those to 1D. So over time, you're going to be one of the most powerful characters. I balance that by saying you earn it. You get to the point where you are ridiculously powerful, but you get there slowly. So you're balancing the fact that early on you're weak, and at the end you're very, very strong. You're still not going to be as strong as somebody who took 3D or 1D in super strength at the very beginning. They're going to have a higher strength stat than you at the end of the day because they've been improving that all along. But I don't know. I thought it would be a lot of fun. The one time we tried it, I wasn't in the game, and you guys read it wrong and gave him straight up 1D in each of those powers. So the Cynic. It was a game with the Cynic and Mrs. Buse.
Oh, okay. I thought she used something different, but
That's what you guys told me.
it's been years.
Yeah, it has. All right, so what else do we got going on here? Doobie, doobie doo. So what else do you want to talk about?
Well, let's see. We kind of went over a little bit about the purchasable powers, which are, I mean, not too much, but talk
We
about
got
it.
most of them.
Yeah. I mean, purchasable
Oh,
powers are pretty much just like,
there must be a version 4.0 because Psychic Radar isn't on here,
huh,
or maybe 3.1 or something.
that's different than radar sense.
So Radar Sense lets you see everything around you without. It's a radar
Hmm.
or a sonar. You have a sense of where everything is without looking at it. Psychic Sense lets you see all the people within a radius,
Okay.
all the animals, all the plants, but you can't see buildings.
Okay.
Like Radar Sense would help you get out of a maze. Psychic Sense would let you know where people are. Which,
Understood. It's,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, like in video games when you have like a detect life spell, and you can see on the other side of the wall there's people, as opposed
Yeah,
to being able to look at a map and just seeing the outline of everything that you're gonna go through.
pretty much. And you had the hardest time keeping that straight when I played the psychic character.
Yeah.
You can't ambush a character with psionic radar. You can't. Not unless they're, you know, outside of the radar with a sniper rifle or an energy long distance attack power or something. And
I,
that came up like 4 or 5 times, and you're like, oh, I keep forgetting he's got that power.
yeah, I ran into that even with playing Star Wars with the
Yeah,
detect life
life
or
detection.
whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Macro or micro vision. So the purchasable powers, real quick, are wall crawling, underwater breathing, energy sustenance. Um, Interesting. Radar sense, psychic radar, and radar sense can be sonar if you really want to. You really want it to be sound based instead of radar based. Whatever. You want to get into that level of detail in your game, go for it. Macro or micro vision, and those are two different powers. You can either see in the microscopic world or at far distance. And then X-ray, ultraviolet, or infrared vision. Again, that's three different powers. Um, Not sure what ultraviolet vision would give you off the top of my head. I know I had an idea at the time when I wrote this.
Oh,
Hmm.
definitely could
I
work
think.
as a spy thing if people wrote messages out.
What was that?
Could work well as a spy thing if people write messages so that other people can't see them, and
you'd see a lot more colors. You'd be able to see considerably better at night. Infravision it lets you see people better at night, but it's not as crisp. Oh, maybe that's what I was thinking was night vision. Wall crawling. That's not just Spider-Man. There's a lot of characters who basically get like a gecko power that just
Yep. Definitely Nightcrawler. Didn't Speedball have something like that too?
I don't know. I didn't read all of New Warriors. I liked and didn't like the Speedball character. He was just the wrong amount of goofy for me.
Depended upon who wrote him too, as many comics go.
Yeah, yeah. Not a big Tom DeFalco fan. Not that he was bad. He wasn't my cup of tea. I didn't. His Spider-Man run was good, but I never thought it was great. That's pretty much how I felt about Spider-Girl, May Parker, because he did all that. When I found out he was in charge of the new universe from back in the day, um, Marvel's new universe, he was supposed to be the one who created that, and he failed utterly. And Jim Shooter gets all the credit for the failure, and he's very happy to take it, by the way. But it wasn't his fault. He had trusted his number two in editorial, and Tom DeFalco failed him, and that just knowing that doesn't sit well with me. All right, let's skip up to the major powers. We covered passive powers, which is basically just a bonus to your skill check, and then super speed combat is a game breaker. We know because it broke the game.
Yes.
It's still in there. It's not that big of a game breaker, but it is a game breaker. So here's how it reads. Every pip in super speed combat gives your character an additional action in every combat round with no multiple action penalty. So a super with one die, super speed combat, can throw 3 punches for every one a normal person can, or they can take 3 shots with a rifle, or drive a car, take a shot at someone and dodge other vehicles all in the same combat round. This is the first power that the restriction's not in here. Maybe that was in one of the addendums we sent back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
You're not allowed as a player to take both super speed combat and damage power, like super strength or energy generation, because you're just going to do way too much damage. You're going to break the game.
And didn't we? I thought we also said that. I thought we made it so you had to take super speed running if you took super speed combat. I thought that was the.
No.
Okay, it might have been
It was,
the thing we talked about.
remember, the Cynic took. She just started with super speed combat and either invisibility or invulnerability, or maybe both of them. Not invulnerability, intangibility. And yeah, when she got at a Christmas party, one of the gifts that Buse gave out was, and it was one of the greatest, cheapest gifts of all time. It cost him ink on paper. 1 free dice of superpowers. Yes, you can use this to create a new power. And the Christmas party was everybody who played, like the party was the first 20 minutes, half hour, maybe an hour of our game session. So, really wanted that.
Yeah.
And I knew I couldn't take it either. Because, okay, so he's the GM. I'm the game creator. I went through more characters than anyone else because once I got a feel for the power and how it worked and did my best to break it, I moved on to another power and a brand new character, which was annoying for the people I was playing with. It was annoying for me having to come up with a brand new personality each time because I don't go halfway. I'm 100%. Remember Gravity Guy?
I liked him.
Everybody liked him. So annoying. Okay, this is a direct ripoff. It wasn't just inspiration. It was a direct ripoff of Aquaman from the cartoon Batman the Brave and the Bold. That's outrageous! And that was the character. No matter what he was a superhero, and he's energy generation, gravity, energy manipulation or control, gravity, I think it's control, and the rest of his powers went into regeneration and energy sustenance, gravity. So he didn't need to eat, sleep, or drink, or breathe, or whatever it is. And he could regen. So as long as he didn't die, he would come back. And that was his backstory. He was fighting. We had this character named John King who had taken over California, and Gravity Guy started off as a teenager in California, and he's fighting. He's the main character fighting against John King, who took over the entire West Coast. And so he ruled the West Coast of America, and no one could stop this guy. He was super strong and invulnerable. He was one of the first supers to come up, and Gravity Guy grew up under that. And like his last years, when his power surfaced, he went straight on, head on to fight John King, and lost. And like Don Quixote, once he regened and survived the fight, he went head on against John King and lost. And that was his backstory. Is he's this star-crossed is the wrong word, ill-fated. Is it star-crossed? He's doomed to fail on his own because he just doesn't have the power. But he gave John King's wife, who was called the Queen. We called them the King, the Queen, and either the Jack or the Prince. I forget. It's been a few years. And his son, John King's son. And so he went up against all of them, and very powerful gravity manipulation, very powerful ability, a lot of fun to play with, and boy was that an annoying character to keep up. It's a high energy character. You're always on all the time. Yes, I am Gravity. I'm here to save the day. We're here to fight evil. I'm Gravity. Yeah.
Everybody was so sad when you changed.
Oh,
Because your
I
other
needed to. I couldn't.
your next character was like the most subdued of all of your characters too.
Who was my next character? I forget. Because I did the psychic. I think that was right before Gravity Guy.
Yep,
Was that right after?
Psychic was right before Gravity Guy. The guy afterwards, I forgot it.
Oh, the healer.
That was it. The healer. He was like a
Yeah.
sniper and a healer.
Yeah. And he was just this laid back. So we had this campaign went on for almost 3 years.
Hmm.
And it was a lot of fun. And every single time we played, I was dead tired because I'm up all night most of the time. I'm not up during the day. I play during the day. Usually started in the early afternoon when I had to drive all the way up to your place or Boomman's place or wherever it was being held. And trying to, like, if I was just playing Gravity Guy and it was during hours I was normally awake, probably could have played him the whole time, no problem. But high energy character for all of you actors and performers out there who you've played somebody who's just on all. It's like being Robin Williams. What?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay.
I'm playing.
I thought you had something to say.
Sorry.
No, he's on all the time. When he's on stage, he's on all the time. But then afterwards, he would just crash. And during the filming of Mrs. Doubtfire, if you haven't seen that movie, it's really good. One of the kids there, was it Matthew Lawrence who was one of the kids? I just saw an interview. Was Matthew Lawrence in it?
Yeah.
Oh.
He was the oldest son in it.
I've seen that. That sounds familiar. I haven't seen it since it came out. No, I've seen it like twice since it came out, but not in the last 2 decades or so, or a decade and a half. He just saw an interview with him, and he's like, the thing about Robin was I didn't understand how much that performance took out of him. And I was an 11-year-old kid, and so when Robin was done on stage, he would go back to his trailer, and Matty Lawrence said, I remember one time I was a kid. I ran in to go talk to Robin because he was so much fun. And I burst through the door of his trailer, and he's sitting there like this. And he doesn't even look up when I come in. He's just like this. And he's like, I know they say it didn't, but I think those 5 years when I was just only doing cocaine, I think they really, really wrecked my brain. And this guy had, I wouldn't say a dark side, but that kind of a performance takes a lot of energy. Keeping a Gravity Guy,
It's outrageous. We can win. We're heroes. We are champions. We are going to save the day. Because evil must be vanquished and good must triumph. Oh, so much. Oh, man.
I do have
It was
to.
a lot of fun. What?
The two cartoons which influenced my game the most when it came to the the players, not from what I designed it after, but from the players, was Brave and the Bold and Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Yeah. Which were both roughly on it around the time we were playing this.
Yep.
Earth's Mightiest Heroes was a very good show. I wouldn't say it was great, but I felt it was very good. I really enjoyed it.
It was. I think of it similar to the X-Men and the Spider-Man shows that I grew up with.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
wasn't perfect, but for people who never read comics, and probably never would, it was a nice contained world where you could generally understand everything, and it was entertainment, and you could get the general gist of multiple different storylines
Mhm.
that had occurred. I mean, they focused on more newer comic book storylines for that time frame, but yeah, just like, X-Men, which did
Yeah.
the Phoenix Saga a lot better than the movies did. Uh, I know. We're trying to stay positive.
Oh, yeah. And you bring up Phoenix Saga.
But
Inkaroo. Anyway,
because I mean, I think the X-Men cartoon even did the Flank Saga as well.
which saga?
The Phalanx Saga, Techno-Organic people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't even good in the comics. It was better in the comics, but not by a lot.
That was that was one of the, but that was like in my earlier comic book days when they did the Phalanx
Yeah.
Saga. And the Phalanx Saga caused me to go back and read some of the New Mutants for obvious reasons.
Doug Ramsey is one of my favorite characters in comics, and they brought him back to life in the last couple of years, which was stupid. Um, but he's so inconsistent over the course of New Mutants. When Chris Claremont writes him, he's one character. When Bob Budiansky was writing the New Mutants,
I
he
don't.
becomes a
Sorry, bad.
so Doug Ramsey is it's amazing character. I think the closest thing I could compare him to is if you've seen NCIS, the character of Timothy McGee. If if he was with a human, he'd be one of the most impressive humans in the group. He grew up on a ranch in, oh, I want to say California, but I can't remember. Moved out to New England. He was in an advanced school, the school that Kitty Pryde. So he was introduced as a love interest for Kitty Pryde in the pages of the X-Men. Just a normal human kid. And Kitty Pryde at the time was a comp sci enthusiast. She was a super genius. And Doug Ramsey was keeping up with her. She was a little smarter, but for some reason he was better with breaking into hacking, breaking into computer code and understanding the computer code. The way he put it at one point is, I can get us into any system, but Kitty, you can make it sing. On top of that, he's a kid who grew up on a ranch. He knows how to fight, like any kid, more than most kids his age. He knows how to ride horses. He knows how to fix things. He had all these different skills that Chris Claremont was building him up with to be a normal human who could become part of the X-Men family, which he'd done previously in the past, like with Stevie. Oh, what's her last name? I'm thinking Stevie Nicks, but that's a stinger. The black girl, the black woman who taught Kitty Pryde how to dance. She was a local dance instructor in Westchester County, New York.
I didn't read it.
Oh, so these are the issues that start actually exploring in a very minor way in the early 80s lesbianism. Because Storm has all these feelings for Kitty that are very protective and motherly, and she's actually jealous of the time and the attention that Kitty is giving Stevie. Go ahead.
Hunter.
Thank you, Stevie Hunter. And there's a lot of characters in the X-Men who don't have powers, which would work great for the system too. There are characters who just don't have powers who are major players in different storylines or just friends that they can trust. And so, as a counterbalance to Colossus as a romantic interest, Dave Ramsey was created. And
Doug.
Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey came in and taught everybody how to balance their budget and put money in envelopes. Important skills to have, kids. Don't spend more than you make. Don't spend more money than you make. If you do decide to take a loan out, make sure you can pay off the monthly payment well within your budget. Anyway, Doug Ramsey ended up becoming a mutant, and he was brought into the New Mutant storyline. And once he became a New Mutant, he always felt like he was outclassed by everybody because his power wasn't a combat power. His power was to understand every language, which included all computer languages, which is why he was such a computer genius. Great character. He ends up getting killed trying to prove himself, saving Wolfsbane's life. Rain
Sinclair.
Sinclair. It was coming to me. Thank you, though. Yeah, so he saves her life. He takes a bullet for her. And that was a really, really sad issue. And so they kind of started bringing him back with his whole interaction with Warlock, who was an alien, who could absorb life energy and shapeshift into anything, and had total control over his molecules. Boy, that doesn't sound like Apocalypse at all, does it? Apocalypse came much later. And anyway, Warlock used to mix with Doug, and then some of his techno-organic virus that he used to absorb energy from people was they took it from Doug Ramsey's grave. They actually excavated his grave in the pages of X-Men or New Mutants or whatever, and that's where they got their techno-organic virus to create the Phalanx from, which was the shape-shifting techno-organic thing. And anyway, they either should have brought him back then, and they kind of did with this character called Douglock because Warlock dies. But they don't. They kind of brought back Douglock, and then he just stopped being written about, and it was like he was this great character, and they killed him off to drive home how real deaths in comic could be, and they didn't bring him back for over 20 years. And I was glad. I really liked the character, but I was glad that they let him stay dead.
Well,
That's weird.
That's one thing we've talked about before, and probably should end on this because we're a little longer than normal tonight. But we've talked about it before, kind of even in one of our previous episodes, even if it is the unseeable episode. Comics sometimes just they're not as good at letting things kind of evolve. I mean, there's a reason that, you know, Peter Parker hasn't gotten over the age of 30, even though he started at 16.
60 years ago.
Right. Uh, there was when I was younger, when I first got into comics, it was explained to me then, and it fit for a few years.
A long time.
That you could, in general, although, because current events do appear in there, you kind of have to fudge it a little bit, but characters' ages tended to be like 3 years real time to 1 year in comics. But as time goes on, that just expands out further and further and further. And now I think Marvel did end up having like some sort of reboot, but it wasn't a complete reboot. Stuff still existed. It was weird. It was like a multiverse clash, and that's how they brought Miles Morales into the main line and all that other stuff.
I stopped reading by then.
So did I, but Wikipedia's the thing. And the Marvel Universe Wiki. And I'll be honest, I paid for Comixology for a couple months. But anyways, I think one reason why at least it was harder for me to get back into comics is because I'm like, I would love to see more of an aging Spider-Man, mentoring younger heroes, because even if you have them, have superheroes age more slowly, which I get and I'm okay with, eventually they should age out. And we shouldn't be, as much as I like stories where, superheroes have kids and maybe those kids eventually become superheroes and, you know, although most of them have to travel into the future so that they can get rid of the whole time bump thing. But as much as I like stories like that, it would be good to just see new heroes come, old heroes die off or retire. But you need, because some stories that are good could have been written for newer characters. You just have to have the faith and trust that your stories are good enough that it will get people to buy it. Otherwise than that, it feels like you might be just depending too much on your name. You're depending too much on Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Wolverine, X-Men, Justice League being on the cover, as
Mm.
opposed to being like, this is a good story. One of my favorite comics, I read probably the first 2 years of it. Um, I was young, I was broke. I want to go back and get the trade paperback. But Darkhawk, and I know you and I
Mm.
have talked offline about this before. I liked the character because he was new, he was young, and they actually even started for him to have like a mentoring relationship with Peter Parker because he was a bit darker than what Peter became, you know, because he watched his father get murdered by people right before he got his powers and stuff like that. And it was just nice. I liked the stories, and we need more of that. And again, because like I think of like a lot of these heroes, they try to like tag them on to something else. You've got Miss Marvel, who, while I don't read a lot of her stuff, I don't have an issue with the character, but
Which Ms. Marvel?
the current Miss Marvel,
All right.
they tie.
Who died, you know.
Yeah, I heard about that, which is good, I guess. I haven't read the story, um, but they but they still tie it to a previous character. You have the current Superman who is, Clark's son.
No, it's Kal again.
I thought they're both Superman.
No. Well, he might still be Superman in the pages, but the main character of the book is back to being Clark
Okay.
because sales.
Well, makes sense. But
Um,
yeah, but still, we'll even go even with experiments on focusing on different, they're always tied to someone else. I would be perfectly happy, and I think it should happen, for Bruce to retire and have one of his 80 Robins take over as Batman. Like, I mean, they tried to do somewhat of that, and they tried to do it in the past, and from what I've heard,
for a while.
yeah, some stories were good, some were bad,
Do
but they just
you remember Earth 1 and Earth 2 before Crisis on Infinite Earths?
a little bit, yeah, I'm familiar.
So the basic idea is Earth 1 were superheroes who had been around since the 40s and they aged. And that's where,
Justice Society and
oh,
stuff.
not just the Justice Society, but what was the name of that TV show with Catwoman and Batman's daughter? Birds
Birds
of
of
Prey.
Prey.
The Birds of Prey TV show, the character of Catwoman and Batman's daughter, of Bruce and Selina's daughter, comes from Earth 1 because the next generation of heroes was still being written about. And then in the 70s, they reset DC without resetting anything. So they started publishing modern day Superman and they restarted the story and modern day Batman. And they were young again. So you had both old Superman comics coming out and age wise. You have an aged Superman and a young Superman stories, and young Superman stories were on Earth 2, and older Superman stories were on Earth 1, or the other way around, whatever it was. And it got to the point where their sales they needed to revitalize, so they did the first major retcon of the entire universe in the history of comics, and it was called Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they streamlined the whole thing down to one world, and that was it. It's more complicated than that, but that's kind of what you're talking about. It's really the debate between static versus dynamic characters. I know. I'll be quick. One of the things that really annoyed me as I go negative.
It was the cat. I wasn't had nothing
Oh,
to do.
I know we're going over. Um, Hi, Cat. How you doing? Is he looking up while I'm talking or something?
Well, he is now, but he's looking
Ah.
on this way.
So anyway, one of the things I loved about, or I hated about the Civil War in the comics, Marvel's Civil War story between Iron Man and Captain America, and that whole argument. It was a very interesting idea, and had already been done about 10 times. But it was an interesting idea. It was well done, but the reporters who wrote about it were like, now we're finally seeing the first postmodern heroes. We're finally seeing heroes that change over time. And clearly, they didn't know what they were talking about because the X-Men had always been exactly what you're describing up to a certain point. Well, Chris Claremont wrote them for 17 years. Those characters grew over time. Who Cyclops was at the beginning of the story is not who Cyclops was in 1991 when he left.
Yep.
Wolverine grew from this obnoxious little snot that I wanted to smack, and he slowly grew into. He got over his rage. He got over his loss of memory to a degree and started becoming more human and less feral.
My favorite.
Colossus, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say. Now I was just adding on to it, but like some of my favorite stories are the Wolverine run where it's him and Jubilee kind of going around all over the place, and he's like acting as like a mentor to her and helping her deal through her own rage issues from her family being killed and stuff. So yeah.
Mhm. So yeah, you've got all of that. Um, it's been done, and it's been done well. It's been done shoddily, but it's also been done well. And I really appreciate when continuity gets adhered to like that. It when you start seeing characters, this everything people are going through now as they're complaining about. Talked about this in the Lost episode, as they're complaining about Star Wars isn't the same as when it was when I was a kid. Star Trek's not the same as when it was when I was a kid, and I don't like it. Well, I don't like it either, but I'm used to it. Because every time a creative team changed on a comic book, it changed the entire comic book. I remember in the early 90s, 91, 92 at the latest, when Colossus left the X-Men. And that storyline didn't make any sense. I've read the last 17 years worth of Colossus stories. I know who Peter Rasputin is. I'm a reader. I can understand what they're talking about. I know the story.
Mhm.
And suddenly he's leaving the X-Men. The reason they gave wasn't good enough. It didn't work with who this character was. This guy has put his life on the line to save anyone, not just the entire world, but to save anyone dozens of times in 17 years. He's a hero. He's quiet. He keeps to himself. He likes to fool around with girls a little too much, but that only happened like 3 times. Um, he didn't know how to handle Kitty being infatuated with him, which was why they brought up the whole Doug Ramsey character. I know who this character is. But he respected Kitty. He never took advantage of her. He just didn't know how to explain to her. He told her many times. It was like one of the things I loved about this. People are like, Kitty and Peter together forever. Oh, he had a childhood crush on on a guy who's almost 10 years older than her, who keeps gently pushing her away and saying this isn't right. He doesn't quite say that, but he's trying to not break her heart or cause problems inside the team. And that's the relationship. It doesn't grow into them being lovers. He kind of lets it go a little, but he never crosses the line. He's always looking for another date, and he keeps telling Kitty, we're not together. But he's trying to do it gently. That's the kind of guy Colossus was. I know who Nightcrawler started off as, and I know who he became. And Storm, oh, one of the greatest characters. The movies have never done her justice. Storm is one of the greatest characters for those 17 years. Is one of the greatest characters in the history of comics. Period. He's got a series of arcs. He grows so much. She's had an incredibly hard life. She lost her powers and still led the X-Men as an effective leader, which again is something our system would allow people to do. It's brilliant, and her
most famous line from the first X-Men movie is, "Do you know what happens to a toad when it gets hit by lightning?" The same thing that happens to everyone else. What? I remember, were you there when we saw that in college? Because that came out in college, '99.
I don't remember who I saw that with.
It was a big group of us. And so we're walking out. So Mike and Spike, I was talking to them a lot. And I don't think they were together yet as a couple. But Mike and Spike they went with us. And so before that, Mike had been asking peppering me with all these X-Men questions. We were talking about it and everything. And my comment at the time, we're going way over tonight. My comment at the time was, um, there's no possible way they could fit. I think at the time it was from 1963 to 99, 30 years of history, 30 to 40 years of history in an hour and a half movie, not even in a 2-hour movie. You can't do it. So this is X-Men the movie was when I came up with my standard for adaptation. You need to stay true to the characters, true to the spirit of the story, to the tone. You're not going to be able to fit 40 years of story in a 2-hour movie. You can't fit it in a 6-hour movie. You're able to do 1 to 2, maybe 3 storylines in 3 movies, which is fine. And I felt they did an edit. So we're walking out, and everybody's like, "Did you see that part where?" And then they went and did this, and Wolverine popped his paws, and then when they get in the fight in the cage and his claws, and the guy says to him, "Don't kick him in the balls." He said, "Anything goes." Yeah, but if you do that, he'll take it personally. I haven't seen this movie in almost 20 years, but those lines stay with you, and everybody's excited about it. And I'm walking out very subdued, in the quiet way that I am most of the time. I'm not. I'm not gravity guy most of the time. I'm not usually like, "I'm Rodriguez, let's go save the world." Most of the time, I'm just a quiet guy reading a book, or on my phone, or playing a game, or whatever. So everybody's so excited and had a great time coming out of it. I'm very quietly walking. Mike's on one side of me talking to probably Booman or whoever it was who came with us. And they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I'm just quietly walking. And Spikey says to me, "I want to hear what you thought." What? "Well, you're the X-Men aficionado. You've read how many thousands of comic books. What did you think of it?" Well, I thought they did a pretty good job of getting the characters right. Not a great job, but a pretty good job of getting the characters right. Characters are 40 years old, 30 years old. I think they did a pretty good job. Uh, that's it. That's all I said. And she's waiting for me to finish. And I finished, and there was like that pause. She goes, "That's all you have to say?" I'm like, "Look, it was a good movie. I enjoyed it. I'm going to buy it when it comes out on DVD if I have the money," which I didn't. I got it many, many years later. And that was it. I enjoyed it. I was happy to go to the movies and see it. These weren't the characters that I had grown up with, but they were close. I'm used to that. And then when X-Men 3 came out, the Phoenix Saga, where they didn't completely ignore what came before, but hey, it was close. And they killed off Cyclops because he got another job. Do you remember that?
Yep, because he was in Superman.
Yeah, it was the Brandon Routh Superman. Superman, what, Returns?
Yep.
So he got that job. So they were filming at the same time, so they killed off his character instead of just saying he was injured or sick or whatever. That's always a bad move. And yeah, it was easy. And not X-Men 2? Wow. So X-Men 2 came out the same year as Attack of the Clones. And Attack of the Clones is the more famous movie now. It's got the whole Star Wars legacy behind it and everything. And it's the turning of Anakin Skywalker. You can see as Anakin Skywalker starts to turn to the dark side. He feels the temptation of vengeance because the Tusken Raiders had kidnapped and tortured his mother. And he feels that turn. Some of the worst acting I've ever seen in a major movie. I killed him. I killed them all. The women and the children too. You're confessing to murder.
vengeance murder, but put some oomph into it. Anyway, I did not appreciate the choice he made in that particular film. And these guys, but you got to look at the positive. That's the whole point of this stupid little rant I'm going on and not letting you say anything is you've got to appreciate the positive. These things, people are going to change their fandoms around. Other people own the IP. And if it gets bad enough, do what I do. Stop watching until enough people tell me it's good again. Because I can't take it. I can't. When it gets really bad, I see all the problems with the story, and I don't want those memories. I don't want to see that. I'm certainly not going to pay for it. But when it is good again, just like comics, it starts getting good again, or the comic gets canceled, which is what's going to happen to these movies if they keep underperforming, and TV shows and whatnot. It's already started happening with some of these TV shows. We've seen it happen many times. If you don't make money, you don't stay in business. It will get good again, or it'll move on to a different genre, and we won't get those movies and TV shows anymore. Same with comic books. When X-Men starts to flounder, they put a new creative team on it. When Captain America starts to flounder, they put a new creative team on it.
Yep.
So that's where we're at.
Well,
and I guess my point is I'm used to this. People back in the day were saying, George Lucas ruined my childhood with the prequels. He didn't ruin my childhood. My childhood was great. Star Wars was a small part of it, and that part of it was great. I didn't appreciate the prequels as much. I appreciate it less now, but did I think they were as good as the original trilogy? No. Do I think they were better than the sequels? Yeah. Do I love the plot, the overarching storyline of... I'm looking down because that's where Tim's face is. I have to keep remembering to look at the camera. Because I'm talking to the audience too. Do I love the overarching storyline of how Palpatine manipulates both sides against the middle? Oh, it's brilliant. But that's a subject for another podcast. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I apologize for the mess behind me.
All right. I got my box up here.
There you go.
And here's some magic cards. And there's Star Wars Monopoly, a game I've never played once in my entire life.
I've played it once, the day I was given it.
Yeah. People give me gifts because it has Star Wars written on it.
I can't tell you how many cups and stuff. I've started to throw away some of that stuff. But anyways,
when I was cleaning out the side room about half a year ago now, I found a box of Star Wars junk toys from episode 1 that people gave me because it said Star Wars on it. I've got in the wrapper a Qui-Gon Jinn lollipop that if you push the button on it, it rotates. The lollipop rotates.
I remember those.
And it's still in the wrapper. I'm sure it's rotten on the inside, but I've never opened it not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want it in the first place. What am I going to do with I'm going to eat the lollipop?
I got like
anyway.
I got like an R2D2 Slurpee cup that had like the rubber topper on it and stuff like that. It's like
I've drank it out of that.
Exactly. It's like, thank you. I would not have chosen to buy it for myself, but I appreciate the sentiment.
I didn't buy it for you. I'm drinking out of it out of your house.
Oh no, I'm talking about the person who did get it.
Oh, right, I'm with you. Slow.
Oh, it's all good. Well, everyone have a fantastic night, fantastic week, and we will see you next time.
I'm excited. You people are beautiful out there. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.